Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. All right. We are in. We are live. I'm going to give everyone a few seconds to sort of trickle in, especially since this is not one of the normal stream times. I think that people are not going to be prepared. But this is going to be interesting. It's the first kind of YouTube video, or I guess stream I've done with the intention of making it a YouTube video. Uh, what up, Undead King? How you doing? Undead King's always here for me. I appreciate it. Yeah, and I guess while people are trickling in, I'll give a little bit of context as to the origin of this video and the origin of this idea in general. So way back when I was talking about how bad a certain section of the Underdark in Critical Role was, I kind of drew out a diagram. I drew out a map where I used my own personal map making notation and map, I guess you could call it analysis notation. And I had several people ask me about it afterwards, say that they thought it was interesting. And so I thought that I would make a full video on it. I'm not going to show every little bit and bob, just kind of the basics, the core of it, as well as the core of how I use it. Maybe we'll do some later video for the, I guess you could call them more advanced topics. But I just wanted to keep it really clean and streamlined for this one so that we're all on kind of the same page about what the notation is and what it is not. I started using it and developing it, probably close to 5 years ago at this point, maybe 6. Because I noticed over a segment of a campaign, like an arc of a campaign that I was DMing, I kept giving my players dungeons that I thought were going to just be bomb. Like they were just going to go down so well. And the reaction was super mediocre. Maybe mixed would be the better word. It didn't have the kind of the really high level of response that I was expecting. And so I kind of said, okay, there must be something I'm doing wrong. And I'm a big patterns guy. I'm a big analysis guy, even when it comes to more artistic pursuits like D&D and like DMing in general. So I thought, okay, I can try to quantify this. And that is how my map abstraction notation was born. And I think that's probably enough vamping. We're 3 minutes in. I think I can probably get into it. So today I'm going to be showing you my map abstraction notation. I want to be really clear about what this notation is and is not. It is not a direct science. This is not going to give you like step-by-step instructions of how to make a map that your players are going to really love. But what it is going to do is really help you look at maps that you already like and maybe figure out why you like them, and look at your own maps and more easily understand them. I think that's the big thing, is the notation really strips away all of the window dressing, the flavor, the flowery stuff that can distract you. Because you might get really into a certain concept of the map, and then it either just doesn't get addressed, or it gets addressed in a very different way than you anticipated when you first started building it. And this is mostly because when a DM describes their world, they'll never describe it 100% accurately or fully. Like, you are never going to be able to 100% communicate what's in your head as a DM to your players. There's always something that gets lost in translation. So part of the good thing about this notation is that it forces you to abstract your maps, which kind of forces you to not 100% accurately look at these maps. It helps you get into that mindset of your players, put yourself into the position of not seeing all the flowery window dressing type stuff. So you'll better understand your own maps, and you will better understand how the map will be understood. And to really hit home on that, if any part of your map, when we're going through this and you're trying to use this notation, or when you're watching me use the notation, every single part of the map is going to get exactly one classification. And I'll go over those classifications in a second, but if an area of the map does more than one thing, you just have to pick the primary thing that it does. You are not allowed to... Oh. Bug wants to play. What up, this dude? If an area does more than one thing, you have to only pick one. And this is to force you into really thinking about what is the primary thing that this area does. It might do a lot of minor things, but it will always do one primary thing. And once you start really using this and start really getting into this notation, you will develop your own tips, tricks, and rules that kind of suit your style. I have several for my own personal style that I'll tell you all about, but they are not laws. The map abstraction notation just allows you to better understand your maps and come up with your own rules and tips and tricks. So, with that, I will open up one of the maps, but I won't even talk about the map yet. I'm just going to show you guys the different types of nodes. And actually, this is a bad one for it. So we're going to open up Forge of Fury. But like I said, I'm not going to actually talk about the map itself yet. We're just going to talk about these different colors. So there are 4 types of nodes. Well, to be more clear, there are nodes and there are paths. Everything is a node or a path. That is it. Okay? So there are going to be 4 main node types. There are going to be these, the black node types. These are nothing special. They can be considered your default or your basic node, where they don't have anything interesting, there's no fighting, it's just a room. Now there are obstacles, and obstacles are both, they can be a lot of things. They are basically something that you have to deal with before you can move on and move past. And I'm actually I have some bullet points. I'm just going to move to a different screen just to make sure I hit everything. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and Undead King, this is that's part of this as well, of even if you don't make maps, if you are at all interested in running modules or generally picking maps online, this analysis can really help you decide what you want. And it can also help you say, like, okay, maybe this map is like 90% there, but there may be these little tweaks that I can make to make it just that much better. So anyways, yeah, these obstacles basically are just things that have to be dealt with to progress. If you do not deal with the obstacle in 5, you cannot reach 8 or the tunnel junction. All right, so that is an obstacle. Next is treasure. Treasure is just anything that is generally valuable. Normally it has a gold amount attached to it, but it could also be things like a land deed, maybe a set of forged papers, a key. There's a lot of things that could be classified as treasure. It is something that is not necessarily interesting. Maybe it doesn't progress the plot in any way, but it is valuable somehow. Next is the last one, an interesting node. An interesting node is anything that progresses any plot, or it is a specific thing that builds out the theme. But even when I say that, a specific thing that builds out the theme, that is something that progresses the plot, right? So these are things like foreshadowing, they are things like clues. Like, if you have a specific thing in mind, yes, in every room, you should probably be building some sort of theme. You should be giving some manner of foreshadowing of what happens next. But these are very specific instances of it. And you'll see what I mean when we get into the more direct examples. But these should generally be things that are directly related to the overall plot. So those are all the node types. Next are the edge or path types. If you're a graph theory nerd, you know, it's vertices and edges, but I'm going to be calling them nodes and paths. So a black path is just like a black node. It's not anything interesting. There's no obstacle to overcome. It is just a blank hallway. And these are important. I don't want to make this seem like the black nodes or the black paths aren't needed. You need to have empty hallways and empty rooms to give your players a breather. Not everything can be interesting or challenging or some sort of obstacle. So you need these black paths. Next are the red paths, which are obstacle paths. They work exactly the same as obstacle nodes. The general difference is that this would be considered an obstacle that prevents you from getting from one area to another. This would be considered an obstacle that prevents you from progressing through an area. And this is vague for a reason, all right? This has a lot of area for ambiguity, for interpretation. This is where I talked about it's a little bit, but somewhere between art and science. There's some wiggle room for personal style to come out. And I think one of the main ways in which I can see personal style coming out is the relationship between what is a red edge and what is a red dot. I could see that being very much a personal preference thing. Next will be a challenging path. And this is something that I've talked about in the CR watch-throughs before that I think is not very often talked about when people do talk about map design, but that it is an incredibly important part of a good map. A challenging path is something that affects the people along the entire length of the path and can be mitigated, but cannot necessarily be overcome in the same way that you might overcome a red obstacle, right? A red obstacle is maybe there's a group of goblins in this area, and when you defeat the goblins, that area is no longer red. It has transitioned into being black, or maybe blue or yellow. But a challenging path is typically challenging no matter what. There's typically no real way that you can prevent the challenge without substantially modifying the terrain or the map itself. A really good example of this is actually later in Forge of Fury. These purple paths represent a fast-flowing stream. A fast-flowing stream is kind of impossible to explicitly overcome. You can get past it, but the stream will still be there if you were to double back, as opposed to a group of goblins where when you overcome the goblins, when you either make a deal with them or kill them, knock them out, whatever, you're probably not going to have to deal with that on the way back if you were to backtrack. So that's kind of the definitional thing about challenging paths. Another really easy example of a challenging path is some sort of air effect. So if there's gas along a hallway, or if they are in a segment of the map that is exposed to a sandstorm, right? Those are aspects of a challenging path. And the very last one is a shortcut, which this map only has 2 of them. But a shortcut is something very specific. And it is really important to identify, right? There are some other things that maybe you could like subclassify within these paths. And it might seem a bit superfluous to strictly define what a shortcut is, but I promise you it is very important. A shortcut is a path that requires some sort of obstacle, often something that requires a bit more of a specific skill set to overcome, to be dealt with before it becomes accessible, which then bypasses other obstacles or challenging paths. So, for this example, for this one, this is behind a secret door in Area 40, and you have to bypass the obstacle at 39 to get to it. If you do take this shortcut, you bypass both of these challenging paths that go from 38 to 38A and from 38 to 50. Right? This shortcut bypasses all of that, which is really nice. And you will see later on, once I start getting into the specific examples, shortcuts can really set the tone of a map. Significantly more than you might think. They are perhaps one of the most tonally significant parts of a map. And that's why I do strictly define them and why they get their own color and they get special attention within my maps. Understanding what is or is not a shortcut is vital to understanding how your players will progress through the map, and not only that, how their progression will feel. If they take a shortcut that you don't realize is a shortcut, you might all of a sudden encounter them feeling or acting kind of strangely, and you won't know why. So, that's it. Those are it. There are 4 node types. There are 4 edge types. Everything in a map can be boiled down to one of those 4 types for a node or an edge. So I guess one of 8 types. Now, obviously that is abstracting a lot out of it. And I said at the beginning that this is meant to be an abstraction. You are meant to have to make hard decisions when you use this notation, because ultimately that will force you to think about how you really consider this node. Like, what is the primary purpose of the room? Maybe it has a clue in it. Maybe it has a goblin guarding the clue, right? That's an obstacle and something interesting. What is the primary purpose of that room? Is the primary purpose to give the clue? Or is the primary purpose to present an obstacle that impedes the player's progress? Making those hard decisions and like actually thinking through that stuff will help you understand your map and how your players understand your map so much better. So with that, I will note, again, I kind of talked about how I'm doing the more basic version of the notation. I don't have any more like node types or edge types, but I'm only going to be showing the physical layout for any given path or for any given map. And what I'm calling the easy layout, this isn't really something that I use in my own personal analysis. I use things like the predicted path that I think they'll take, the longest path, the easiest path, the most challenging path. But for this video, I thought it would be easiest if I showed really close to the fastest path. So we will look at where the players will start and basically whatever the goal of the dungeon is. So way over here, we have 38, which is essentially the goal of the Death House. And we make the fastest path, or at least close to the fastest path, between these 2 points. There are some cases where maybe there was an equally fast path through and I just chose one or the other. If I was actually doing like a true shortest path analysis, I would make those two equally short paths equal when I display it, but I figured just picking one and displaying it was easier for the video or the stream. But when we actually, if I ever do any map analysis on stream later, I'll probably do some of those more complicated path layouts. And I do encourage you, if you ever use this at home, do all sorts of layouts. The way that you think they'll go through the dungeon. Imagine if they took the absolute longest path you could reasonably imagine. If I'm doing a longest path analysis, I'm kind of pushing this one out and putting all three of these in there, right? That is a reasonable path with no doubling back. That is something that they could reasonably take. So those are the sorts of things I look at if I'm making a map for myself or my players that I really, really care about and I want to know a lot more about it. But these maps that I'm going to be showing on stream are more to show the notation, explain the notation to you guys so that we can use this notation for future maps that we do care about. So, the first one that we'll look at is the Death House. The Death House is from Curse of Strahd, and it is, I'll call it somewhat notorious. Depending on the online circles you run in, you will see very different opinions of Death House. A lot of people think that the map is just bad, or I should say not the map, the dungeon is just bad. I see a lot of people say that the dungeon isn't actually bad, but that maybe it shouldn't be in a more beginner-friendly book like Curse of Strahd. I see other people saying that actually neither of those are the case. Anyone that finds the Death House to be bad is probably just bad at running it. I've seen a lot of differing opinions. And I would say that the map, on the whole, actually isn't that bad. I actually think it's maybe one of the better of the four that we're going to look at today, maybe second best. But there are some really substantial issues that become quite clear when we actually look at it in this notation. So the first thing that I will point out, and I'll kind of run you through the general path of Death House. You start at the beginning. You can kind of explore this whole first floor. There are absolutely no obstacles of any kind. No traps, no fights, absolutely nothing on the first floor. Then, this is the one thing I forgot to mention. If there's a dotted line, that just means that there's an elevation change. This is not necessary at all to the notation, but I find it helpful to categorize things in my head and to really understand what's going on when I look at some things in the easier layout. So yeah, dotted lines just indicate a substantial elevation change. So, going back to it. In the Death House, nothing on the first floor, besides a few interesting things. Now, these interesting things are hidden behind skill checks, which is already a little dicey. Like we see here, if we go and look at this area on the easy layout, these 2A and 5, this is the kitchen and the foyer area. This is a really risky thing to do, to have an entire floor that is basically empty, except for things hidden behind skill checks. That's a little risky. Now, there is a shortcut to the next floor, although we'll get to that later. And then there is this 3 and 3C relationship with a small obstacle that absolutely leads nowhere. This is just a locked door that leads to nothing. There's nothing interesting in the pantry beyond. It only becomes interesting typically on the way back out of the house. But at that point, there's really no reason to go in here. So the entire first floor, not starting off great. You want something to hook your players. You want some stuff for free. Now, those who have played Curse of Strahd and have played Death House know that there is technically a hook outside with the Durst children appearing as illusions, but that is not on the map. That is to get you into the dungeon. That's to get you into the map. Once you're actually in the map, you can't have... How many nodes is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is 9 distinct areas that have absolutely nothing in them. Even if you pass these skill checks, these are just descriptive flowery things that are like, oh, the molding on the wall you originally think is flowers, but it's actually skulls. Ooh, creepy. Which, like, I was being a little bit generous, I'll be honest, with calling this a blue. But that is something at least somewhat interesting. That is telling you about the nature of the Death House. That's telling you about the nature of the family that lived here. There is something interesting to these two things. However, hiding them behind skill checks is tough, especially at the beginning. Now, this shortcut... This is a shortcut in only the most loosest of senses. And I'm only really calling it a shortcut because the map and Curse of Strahd in general clearly presents it as a shortcut. This is the dumbwaiter between the two floors. This goes from the kitchen to an upper floor. There is absolutely no reason that you need to take it. It does not bypass anything. It doesn't do anything. In fact, the only thing that it does is an active detriment. Only small creatures can take this without any penalties. So it really, all it does is serve to split the party. So I colored these green, but if I was being honest about my analysis of this, these are not green. These are maybe purples? I mean, maybe you could consider them challenging paths because they restrict your movement the entire way along them. I don't know. They're very, very awkward. And they don't serve to actually do anything. So if you're going to have these dumbwaiters in the kitchen, just call them a black path and leave it at that. But they are but they are blocked behind a skill check and a size requirement. So all in all, I don't like that at all. John, just got here. I haven't seen the beginning of your presentation. Just coming in here to joke that the easy layout looks super complicated. Yeah. And they always will. This actually gets into a great point. Thank you for bringing this up, John. One of the great things about the notation is when you put them into these different kinds of layouts, they have very visual, visceral responses. You will very instantly feel, oh, this is too complicated. Oh, this is not complicated enough. And you will very much see what I mean as we look at the other maps on our list. But putting them into these sorts of layouts gives you a very visceral feeling, especially once you've been using this notation for a while. So that's a great thing to point out. So next, I will generally point out this is the entire second floor. So 6 through 10. And again, we have really only emptiness and interesting things. And I'll be honest, I'm still stretching for interesting. I'm trying to make this just not all blacks. And if I were running Death House, I would have this on my second monitor, or I'd have it overlaid over the map to remind myself to try and make those areas as interesting as possible, because that's their primary purpose. Otherwise, you have nothing here. All you have is interesting, and an obstacle, and then more interesting. Which is fine. I mean, and I think that... it's not fine. I should have said that. It is good to have interesting things. And I think that is something that might seem weird to you. It's like, why is it a bad thing that there are so many interesting nodes here? but it is so easy to overwhelm your players. You want a nice ratio of interesting to obstacles to treasure to nothing, to just blank nodes. Having this nice balance is what makes the highs and lows of a pacing. It's what makes it feel like not a slog as they just ram their way through enemies, but it also helps them not feel overwhelmed if you are just hammering them with lore dumps and information in interesting nodes. So that is another thing that this shows is like, okay, you might think that you're just putting more and more clues, you're putting more and more descriptive language, foreshadowing, and that'll just inherently make the map better, but it doesn't always. So that is floor 2. Then we have floor 3, and you can already see, there's something going on. We've now transitioned from kind of nothing to total interesting zone. There are 5 interesting nodes all connected. And then we get to obstacle zone. Bum, bum, bum. Like, you want to more delicately pace these things. You want to kind of spread them throughout. And you do have to think about that. Yes, clearly, they did not anticipate them going from 5 to 2 to 6 to 8 to 9. Right? And if I look at it on here, you'll especially see that. They do not envision you going from 5 to 6, 8, 9. That's not the path that they have envisioned. But that is very much something your players could do. One of the things that we all love about TTRPGs is the way in which our players can surprise us. So you have to be always thinking about not necessarily the worst case scenario, but the most unexpected case. And if they did choose to go from 5 to 2 to 6 to 8 to 9, they would be absolutely overwhelmed. And then if they went from 11 to 14 all the way back to 15, that would be an absolute slog with absolutely no break. So this really tight clustering of the same color of nodes can be absolutely murderous to your pace. Next, I want to talk about bottlenecks, because we've come to one. You can see that this top area is an absolute bottleneck. There is legitimately no way to progress through Death House if you do not go through number 11. And number 11 is just the third floor landing. It's, if we go and look at it, it is on the third floor. It is right here. There's a small combat in it. Nothing spectacular, but there is no way to go through Death House without going through this node. That is a bottleneck, definitionally. So we have to really think about our bottlenecks really carefully. If it is an area that we are forcing our players through, we need to consider all of the ways that they might get there and what that could mean for the pacing. As well as we need to treat our bottlenecks with reverence. This should be an important area. If there is an obstacle here, which I think it's debatable if there even should be, if I'm totally honest, I would generally put interesting things at my bottleneck to inform you of what you're going to get in the next area. And you can put obstacle paths before or after your interesting element, but I would try to put interesting elements at my bottleneck. But regardless, even if you don't do that, you have to keep in mind that this place is important. You have to think about how they're going to come in. Now, them coming into this, actually not too bad. They get something interesting and then they go straight into an obstacle. Not bad. Same thing, they get a treasure, go into an obstacle. Not terrible. But when they come out, oh, terrible. So they've just gone through this obstacle and they are met with obstacle, obstacle, obstacle. If they go through here, they are met with another obstacle. Ugh, this is what people talk about when they talk about a slog, when they talk about having to just grind through a dungeon. You do not want this many reds in such tight proximity, especially if it is on a bottleneck. Now, I won't keep harping on that. They go up the stairs. Then they go to 16. Now, the 16 is the attic, and we immediately have a really common setup. You'll see a lot of obstacle paths into interesting things. Not bad at all. Actually, an all right thing, especially after a big elevation change, to start with a nothing node that is just there for kind of ambiance, a free interesting node, and an interesting node behind an obstacle. This is actually a really common setup and is pretty good, honestly. It gives some intrigue. It makes the world feel a little bit bigger with this easy empty node. Now, this would be a little bit different. You do not want another node beyond this. And this seems, again, this seems like maybe I'm doing too much. But if they go into here and there's nothing, and then they go into here and there's nothing, this feels like a waste of time. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Ugh, and now they have to backtrack, and when they're backtracking, they're going to go back into this room and be like, was there really nothing in this room? This is a total dead end for no reason? This is bad. One dead end, like a very simple, like, okay, there's nothing in this room, go back to the, kind of main area, totally fine. Now, that's my tips, those are my recommendations, but once we get into 18 and 21 is where things start getting, let's call it interesting. 21 requires overcoming the obstacles in either 9 or 20 to overcome. So 21 is a challenging path. It is the staircase from the attic to the basement, and it requires getting in here or overcoming the obstacle here. This is not great. This is not awesome, especially because these obstacles are not super obvious. And this is one of the ways where the map abstraction notation can somewhat fall short. There's no indicator of what the obstacle is or how difficult it might be to overcome. And so when you're first looking at this, you might think that that's okay. But I would really, I would always encourage to have an obstacle not be story locked, right? Like the obstacle here, it literally says like, this is a blank wall unless they have one of these two things. There is absolutely no guidance for any other way to deal with it in the moment. Obstacles should always be able to be dealt with right then and there. Now, other things can make them easier to deal with. Maybe this is a DC 20 perception check. And if you overcome the 9 or the 20, then it goes down to a 5. Or there's no perception check required at all. That's great. I would honestly even hide these behind more obstacles if that was the case. So that's something that you really need to keep in mind when you are thinking through your obstacles. You do not want them to have to grind through random areas of your house. Because again, look at this. Yes, there's the 20 right here. There's the 9 right here. But what happens if they go the fastest way through? They get to 21 and they say, oh shit, like, I can't get there, I guess? And then they say, okay. We know that must be some secret to getting through here. Let's go from the top to bottom and explore every nook and cranny. Oh no. They are going to be wasting so much time in here because they have to. There's no other way past. They have to now explore all of your useless areas that you built into the first and second floor because there's no other way through this bottleneck. This is a very bad example of a bottleneck, something that has no way past without other options, other artifacts, other knowledge. Now, we get to what I like to call a fan structure. A fan structure is one room that has multiple branching rooms off of it. And I'll show you what this looks like on the actual map so that you kind of understand. So this is 22. this is 23 A, B, C, D, E, F. Right? They are given distinct room numbers, and they are distinct rooms. So you do have to make nodes for them. You have to consider them as dots. Now, fan structures are interesting. They can be a really easy way to really centralize a section of your dungeon. They can be used to do a lot of things all at once, and I think that that's what they're best at. This should have a combination of all of the different node types. There should be an empty room. There should be some interesting rooms. There should be an obstacle room. Either a room that's trapped or has an enemy in it. There should be risk and tension, because otherwise you risk the ability of going between these all very quick becoming tedious. Right? Because that's both the advantage and the risk of the fan structure, is that it is so quick and simple to go between all of these rooms. If they're all blue, if they're all interesting, you are going to absolutely overwhelm people. They will get bored, no matter how interesting everything is, and you will get tired of talking as a DM. If they are all obstacles, this is absolutely terrible. This isn't even a slog at that point. It's overwhelming and a slog and a grind. You would never want all of these to be red. If all of them are black, you're just totally wasting everyone's time. And if all of them are treasure, well, that can be bad in a different way. This gets into being able to see how invested your players will be in this map. If you see this sort of thing where they're going treasure, 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 you are firmly embedding your players in their character sheets and not in their characters. If I had to redo this right now, get rid of all of these rooms, put all of this treasure in a single treasure chest, and be done with it. You simply don't want the same node type to be everything on a fan structure. It will get tedious in some way. Now, it could get tedious in a lot of ways, but there will be some way in which it's tedious. Last thing I want to talk about with Death House are what I would call a branching path. This right here, this 22 to 26, right? There are two ways to get from 22 to 26. There's either going from 22 to 27 to 26 or going this southern way, 24, 25, 26. This is bad. You don't want this. This sort of branching path, or you could even classify it as a loop, is not good. You don't want it to be a situation where they go along this path and they go into two separate rooms before just coming back to the place that they were, or they would have been if they had just gone 27 to 26. It makes them feel like they have wasted time. And this branching path is really subtly bad. Because if this 25 just weren't there, right? If we just delete all of that and make this like this, suddenly this is a loop that players can just play with, right? They know very quickly exactly what is going on. They go from 22 to 24 to 26, and they look back and they recognize 27. Like, okay, that was fast. I know what's happening. This is a loop that we can use as a tool, right? Very, very small. But adding just a single node to it can chuck the players out of that mindset. Suddenly, it's like, well, why was this 24 there in the first place? It's very similar to this 16, 19, and then, this phantom third one situation. The moment you add in a third node here, it becomes weird. It starts feeling odd. And they start to wonder, well, what was the purpose of that? Now, the purpose in this case was that there's all of this treasure in this room. And so that's supposed to be the purpose of 25, but they don't have to check these rooms. In fact, these rooms are not narrated to be especially poppin' or luxurious. There's a really good chance that they just wouldn't check these rooms and they would just move on. Now, those of you that know Death House, that know what area this is, or doing your homework on your side, know that I'm talking about this 22, 24, 25, 26. And the opposite way, 22, 27, 26. And you might say, well, 25 has this well, and this well is actually very useful for this 29 fight down here. And you're totally right. But that's what you have to think about. If you just delete this path, suddenly everything is justified. Suddenly this very odd configuration makes sense within the wider context. There's no way to skip this 29, and the 29 can spill out across all of these nodes. Having these blank nodes here to just have the combat spill into is totally okay. And that's why, again, as I said at the beginning, this is somewhere between art and science. You do have to have the context of what the map is to understand certain configurations. But if you say that, if you're looking through here and you say, okay, well, 24 and 25 are configured this way to help with the 29 fight. Well, what if they don't do the 29 fight? That's why you have to not have this path right here, because they don't have to do the 29 fight at all. They could get into 22, go around here, overcome this obstacle right here, this 26, and go straight into the basement. They don't have to do 29 at all. And then this has lost all of its meaning. This has lost all of its purpose, and they will just be like, well, that was kind of weird. That part of the dungeon felt kind of odd. Why was there a random well there? That doesn't really make any sense. And you will have a bad feeling, a bad taste in the player's mouth. Because it's not even like it's an intriguing, like, ooh, why was that there? It's just weird. So, this is a really great example of something that works in theory, but only if your players go a specific path that is actually not the fastest path at all. Now, obviously, your players won't know what the fastest path is, but it really bears considering. The other thing that I want to examine here is the sheer number of obstacles here. If you have ever seen someone talk about Death House, they normally will say something to the effect of the front of the house feels empty, the back of the house feels grindy and super deadly. And just look at this layout. It's super clear why. There are more than half of the obstacles within like a 4-node radius of the goal, and the start has more black than anything else. Right? So this is what they're talking about. When people say that Death House feels empty at the start and deadly at the end, you can just see that in this notation. It's actually very clear when you look at the distributions. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with Death House, very, very last thing, I think I already said that, but actual last thing is this shortcut. And I don't need to talk about this for a long time. This is a Skyrim shortcut. Any shortcut that is one way like this, and by the way, I hate using these arrows. I use these arrows very sparingly to represent one-way paths, paths that cannot be traversed the opposite direction. I don't really believe in them, at least when I'm making my own maps. I think that they are very rarely a useful thing to put into your maps. Sometimes they are necessary, and Forge of Fury actually has a few that I do think are okay. I do think are legitimate. This one is not. This one is just a trap door that you explicitly cannot discover from this side. It won't let you. Because it skips the entire map. Obviously, they won't let you. So then at the very end, the point is supposed to be that if you bypass or if you get through these obstacles up here, then you get this nice quick exit that just bypasses the entire house. And that sucks. Especially because if they did take the fastest path down, there's no reason for them to think that this shortcut would be over here. And so there's kind of one of two situations. Either a reasonable party has to trudge back through everything that they've already done And if that's your intended path and you want to have the house be interesting on the way out, which does seem to be the intention with Death House, then why create this shortcut, right? If that's the intended path, if you want them to trudge back through, just don't have there be a shortcut here. Alternatively, if you don't want them to trudge through the rest of the house, you need to make, number one, the shortcut more obvious. But also, you should have the shortcut be engaging. It should not just be obstacle, obstacle, whoop, you're done. That feels terrible. You want it to not just be a climax and then a peter out. You want interesting things on the way out. After you've accomplished your goal, you still want to be delivering interesting clues about the dungeon and the further plot that will happen after the dungeon. And this shortcut in particular just totally wrecks that. But in general, I would call this a Skyrim shortcut, something that just takes you from the end back to the beginning. And Skyrim shortcuts in general are really terrible for pacing your dungeon in a realistic manner. So that is Death House. Next, we will move on to Forge of Fury. And this actually shows how I go about generally analyzing maps. When I was doing Death House, I wasn't using this tool at the time, so it doesn't have my actual initial analysis on here. But normally what I do is I paste all of the pictures of the map into the tool. I draw all of the nodes on top of it. I paste the nodes out separately. And then I develop the easy layout or whatever other layouts I would like. So we can see here kind of all of how this goes through. And I'm not going to give too much analysis of Forge of Fury. If we want to do a separate video on it, that's great. I'm just going to talk about what this Forge of Fury map shows you about the notation and about the different things that you can learn from the notation and gain from using it, I guess. So this is what the notation looks like. And then let's go to the easy to comprehend layout. Very first thing I want to bring your attention to is the fan structure. Very similar to the Death House over here, but these fan structures actually are not nearly as bad. This one in particular, not terrible. I would maybe put like a yellow, like a treasure on 23B, but overall, not a bad fan structure. This one is terrible. These are just empty room on empty room, and none of them add to anything. There is no reason to continue looking through these rooms. These room 44s. And I'll show you what it looks like on the actual map. There's this central area that is then connected to all of these rooms. Now, this fight can spill into these rooms, but again, there's just nothing interesting. Move some of this interesting stuff into there. Move this shrine treasure into one of the 44s. I mean, and honestly, get rid of some of them. Merge some of these to reduce the number of blacks and the number of, basically the amount of wasted time that you'll have to go through in order to sufficiently explore all of them. So, I mean, but you can automatically see that. If you look at the easier to comprehend layout, it looks terrible, just visually. And that's, again, one of the benefits of the notation is that it immediately looks terrible. Beyond that, there's actually a lot that we can be really happy about with this map. First of all is the ratio and the diversity of node colors as we go through. We have blue, then red, then a red path, then black, then a purple path, red, yellow, red path, blue. I mean, we're just switching through the whole gamut of colors on this first pass through. And I do also like that you can very easily see that this is kind of a high risk, high reward area. There's a large volume of yellows and a large volume of reds, with a nice smattering of blues added in to make sure that it doesn't get boring. This is a really interesting area, especially for a more wargamey type party that wants to overcome challenges and get treasure and get rewarded. Maybe they're not as narratively driven. This is a fantastic map and starting point for that type of party. Now, if your party is more narratively driven, they might find this a bit slow or dull. And that's why you have to know your party when you're analyzing these maps. The other thing that I really want to highlight here is this little diamond. And I'll show you what it looks like on the actual map, because it has the same structure. Now, if you ever played through Forge of Fury, you might know that there are no walls or doors there are no doors or paths between the outside of the dwarf door and 4 and 4A. 4 and 4A are archer arrow slits that rain arrows down on you from the interior if you go to outside the dwarf door. They are specific hazards. However, this is something important, and this is something with my own personal stylization of this abstraction notation. Is I have had so many players and parties just blow their way through walls or teleport through grates, teleport through barred doors that have a slight vision hole through them. You have to think about if there is anything that can pass between these two areas, that's a path. If an arrow can pass through it, so can a Misty Step. Okay? So this goes from being, nothing to just being a challenging path. A player with the right resources can 100% get from 2 to 4. No question. So, that's a really important thing to consider when considering the rest of the notation. Beyond that, I want to draw your attention to a bottleneck and compare it to the Death House bottlenecks. I really, really like this one. We have 3 separate reds all funneling into a single interesting node that is the bottleneck. That's great. It means that they are being challenged no matter what. They are going through a combat. They have really, that they have gotten through the challenge, and now they are being immediately rewarded with some sort of clue. It also means that you can really construct this interesting node to deliver, say, a required piece of information that maybe you can't do on a 6. Like, you don't want to put a required piece of information on 6 because they don't have to go there. But if you make this number 10 the bottleneck, they have to go there. They will have just overcome a challenge, and you can easily reward them with a piece of crucial, critical information. There's also lots of yellow around it to further that rewarding feeling, right? You've gone through the challenges. Here's your reward, both monetarily and narratively. This is a great bottleneck because it all funnels them in to that structure right there. Then we have a breather. We have a reset. So they go through all of this really, kind of intense final bit to this area, and then they get a breather before they go into anything else. They get a black. This is a fantastic bottleneck setup where they have to go through this, and you are presenting them with nice closure to the area they just left and a breather area to get prepared for the next area. Fantastic bottleneck setup. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here are junctions. So I called this the tunnel junction. It doesn't have a number. It's clearly not explicitly called out by the book. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this right here. This junction that goes to this room, and 8. Now, there are a couple of ways to interpret this. You can either just say that 5 is connected to both 8 and the secret passage, and vice versa, that 8 is connected to the secret passage as well as 5, and it's already connected to 5 over here, so it'd be double connected to 5. Or you can have this right here. Now, I just want to draw your attention to this junction type structure. I'm not going to talk about it too much more because Gnomengarde and Emberhold both have really clear examples of why you might want to use junctions. But just keep it in the back of your head for now, that sometimes we will abstract areas that are not explicitly nodes, and we will make them a node. Okay. So that is that. Next, I want to talk about varying paths of entry. So you can see that out here, I have multiple starting areas. Now, the way that I go about abstracting my maps is I like to consider everything as part of the map until it is outside of what I would consider to be outside of the map, and it's easily accessible from each other. So if you know anything about the Forge of Fury, it's in Tales of from the Awning Portal. It is very easy to get from A to B to C to E. I don't remember where D is. I think D is somewhere. I don't know where D is. Oh, right. D is not an entrance. Anyways, it's very easy to get between all of these points. So they are all what I would classify as outside, and they are my starting nodes. Now, this is something that if I was really going to run Forge of Fury, I would probably make a map or make several different layouts, each starting at a different letter to really understand and prepare for my players entering from any of these start points. Now, if you are just looking at Forge of Fury in a general way, you just kind of want to see the overall vibe, maybe call it a rough draft, I would go from the most obvious entrance, and that's what I did here. A and the dwarf door and the ledge is the most obvious entrance. It is the one that is most directed towards within the intro narrative to this dungeon. But these cannot be ignored, and if you seriously want to run the Forge of Fury, you should really consider them and the path that players might take through the dungeon if they use them. Next, I want to look at this little structure right here. This 19, 18 northwest, 18 southwest, all of this. Now you might think, I've talked about the fan structures, and I've talked about that I don't like it when the fan structures have absolutely nothing but the same color all around them. And I stick to that. When I first was looking at this, and this is a really great example of why this abstraction notation works. When I first read this in the Forge of Fury book, I thought that this area was fine. And then I looked at it, and it kind of tipped my spidey senses off. I was like, well, actually, that's kind of shitty. And I looked and I was like, that doesn't look good. I mean, yeah, there's a treasure over here, but it's a lot of red on the way and all around it. Is that treasure worth it? That better be a crazy treasure. And it got me to go back and look. This is the troglodyte area. This is the troglodyte nest. I can tell you right now, that 19 ain't worth it. And if your players trudge through this, if they go through here and they go through here and they encounter all of this red, all of this resistance, this better be very interesting. Or sorry, not interesting. This better be very valuable because you are exposing them to a long series of tasks to get there. Now, I would, if I were to change this, maybe change this into an interesting area that maybe has an obstacle component to this. And again, if you know this, you might say that that's already what it is. This is the hatchling area, except that the hatchlings don't really matter. They are presented within the fiction as if they are interesting, as if they would maybe classify as an interesting node. But they ultimately only serve as further danger and further obstacles. Maybe you could consider them a treasure? Like, you could consider that, like, oh, you could steal the troglodyte younglings or eggs and then go and sell them? But even in that case, this is a lot, really a lot of red and yellow with absolutely no breaks within it to slow down the pace. So it's a clogged area at the very least. At worst, it's an area that your players will trudge through only to be disappointed at what they find afterward. Now that seems a little bit odd, right? That I'm being so harsh on this area, but it has to do with the speed at which you go through this. These reds are dispersed one after the other, and they have optional things to discover along the way. This is red challenge. Oh, whoops. This is red challenging. Red, 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 then yellow. And there is no real way around that. And the notation maybe doesn't do it justice, but this central area could maybe be classified as red as well. I chose not to, because I would say that by default it's not, but someone else could classify it as red, as some of these things will come out and attack you in the central area if you're too loud. In my notation and in my analysis of this map, I chose to make this edge red instead. Kind of symbolizing that need for stealth, because if you do stealth, then this central area has no real risk factors within it. It's only these ones that have risk factors, and that is only if you don't stealth. So it's a little bit of an odd area in general, but it is significantly different. I will also say we just went off of a black, a blue, and then we go, at the absolute worst, 4 red nodes, right? We went off of a black and a blue, and then we're looking at 5 red nodes, along with some red paths. Or no, sorry, not 5 red nodes, 6 red nodes. And then we only get access to 2 treasures here, where if we get through these, at absolute worst, it's 4 red nodes. There's a treasure on the way, and then it's lots of treasure and a blank tunnel nodes over here. It's very slight. It's really, really slight. But it has to do with this fan structure. This fan structure will exacerbate anything that you put on the edges. If you have a bunch of blacks, it will make it more boring than those blacks strung out along each other. If you make it a bunch of treasure, it will make that treasure even more able to take the players out of the action than they would be if they were strung out together. If you put a bunch of interesting nodes around the fan, it will make them even more dull and overwhelming than if they were all strung out in a line. This is both the danger, but also maybe the allure of these fan-type structures. Now, what is next? Gotta reference my notes because I kind of forgot. Oh yeah, I've already talked about the dungeon types and feels, but I think that this is a really good example of those types of feels. I also think that just like this bottleneck, the next bottleneck is very nice to compare to Death House and show how much better it is. This 24 right here is a door. It is the door, 27 is a door. But you have to go through 24 to get to 27. So 27 is a door that has a key. The key is down here in 34. There, you have to go all the way down here to get it. The key allows you instantly through 27, but you can still get through 27 even if you don't have the key. You can lockpick it, and the door has stats. It has an AC, it has health. It is able to be overcome, albeit it's very difficult to overcome if you don't have the key, but it's at least able to be overcome, as opposed to the Death House's 21 up here, where there's absolutely no way to overcome it. This is how you do this type of bottleneck. It's very okay to have a bottleneck that heavily encourages you to go and look in another segment of the dungeon. The other thing about it is that it is a door. It is something that explicitly implies the existence of a key, as opposed to this, which is a blank wall, unless you have already found 19 or 20. There's absolutely no appearance that there is even an obstacle here in the first place. So, really, when you're looking between these two maps, it gives such an incredible example of how you can segment these areas, right? You have the mountain door, you have the Glitterhame, you have the you have the foundry. And in Death House, you have first floor. Oh, goodness, I didn't lock it. You have first floor, second floor, third floor, attic, basement, right? They both have these very explicitly segmented areas that have bottlenecks between them. But oh my goodness, the Forge of Fury is so much better at it. So much better. And it's pretty obvious. It's obvious on this map notation, and it's not obvious on this map notation. And I do want to admit that. I want to make that clear. The map notation doesn't say that this 27 is better than this 21. That is not what the map abstraction does. The map abstraction helps you identify those bottlenecks. You look at this and you're like, ooh, I got to make sure that this area is good. They have to go through this. I need to really consider this. And then you go back and consider it, and it sucks. Whereas Forge of Fury, you go and look at this 27, and you go, oh, actually, that's really good. I like that as a bottleneck. Right? That is the point of the abstraction notation. It is not to solve your map for you. It is to draw your attention to specific areas and things that may or may not be wrong with them. Now, this is a great example of a directed path that I actually really like, because it feels okay. It feels realistic within the fiction that is being presented. This directed path, there is a big risk along here that you might fall into this water, and the water is very fast. It's very quickly flowing. And it is so fast that you cannot swim against the current. So I considered it a challenging path that is so challenging that it is only one way. That's appropriate. And again, this is a great example of the map abstraction notation would not tell you that this is appropriate. It would not say, hey, that's a good directed path, that's a bad directed path, but it draws your eye. You say, ooh, a directed path. Those are risky. I need to give that a second look. And you give it a second look and you decide you like it. So I think that's about it when it comes to the Forge of Fear. Oh my goodness. I almost totally missed it. We got to talk about unnecessary areas, and we got to talk about shortcuts again. I almost forgot. I'm glad I have notes. I don't have a script. I just have like bullet points that I want to hit, and this is I'm so glad that I did that. This area is terrible. I don't actually hate it from I hate this fan structure, but beyond the fan structure, it's not too bad. The problem is it can be so easily bypassed. So easily bypassed. And when you think about how easily something can be bypassed, you have to consider if that will feel all right to your players. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. Now, will it or won't it is going to be heavily influenced by these little green boys. These are shortcuts. Now, these shortcuts are secret doors. They are secret doors that go... I don't know why this is so far over. I don't know why that was the case. They are secret doors that go from a room that is, it has a chief in it. It's a very interesting encounter. And they are blocked by I believe an investigation check to find, and then I believe also a lockpick check to actually open. But it means that you can very easily go from here. Imagine these two paths aren't here, right? Which is what the game would like you to think. The game as a, or not the game, shoot. The module as it presents it to you, would have you think that these two challenging paths are not there. That's horseshit. They absolutely are there. This is a pit. A pit is perhaps one of the easiest obstacles to overcome in all of D&D, to the point that I don't even consider it an obstacle, even from level 1. I always consider pits to be challenging paths at worst, unless they have something at the bottom of them like spikes, right? Where it would still matter if you fell down them. And I have this opinion because of feather falling. Feather falling is an extremely accessible spell, both in potion and in class form in terms of accessibility, and makes this pit a non-issue. If you want to go down there, you just can. Now, there is maybe some discussion around would you even know you have to go down there, and that discussion is immediately bypassed by the fact that the game or the module explicitly narrates how you can see this ladder if you look around the corner on this ledge. So you know that you need to go down there. So that could mean that we're actually okay. That could mean, okay, we have some challenging paths. I also considered, I'll go back up. I also considered ledge to ledge as a challenging path, because while this is an adventure for third level parties can still have the jump spell, and they can still do some clever things like shooting a crossbow across to make a little bit of a tightrope. So there are certainly ways to get from this ledge to this ledge over here. Just, again, a challenging path. A path that is risky, that has danger involved the entire way across, kind of no matter what you do. But it is a path nonetheless. So there are two paths here. Now you could say, okay, this shortcut is actually okay, because it goes from here, you have to go past an obstacle, you have to find it, which does imply that it's a shortcut, and the game presents it, I keep saying game, and the book portrays it as such. It portrays it as a secret behind-the-wall passage, so it's very clearly presented as a shortcut. And it bypasses a dangerous area. It gets you to this 38, and it makes it to where you don't have to take the challenging path. That's actually a fantastic example of a shortcut. And it still would be if there wasn't this entire area up here. And I'm going to really simplify this in order to, I think, more accurately explain it. There are essentially 3 paths here. Okay? 3 paths that all go to the same place, right? They all go to 50. This is the top. This is the middle. And this is the bottom. Okay. Now, this is fine. This sort of 3-pronged structure. Oh, and they all start at 36 or 35. Take your pick. We'll put it at 36. Right, so this is sort of a 3-pronged structure, and you can sort of abstract this pretty far into saying that, okay, the bottom is generally, it's challenging, it's risky, it's dangerous. The middle is generally a shortcut. It's actually much easier than the other two, but it requires very specific skill checks to get through. And the top, what is the top? I mean, I'm looking at it. It doesn't really seem to easily classify as anything. It has the same number of obstacles as this does, as the bottom path does. And actually, you still have to find the shortcut. If you don't find the shortcut in 46, this doesn't get you past at all. So, actually, what's going on here is that this top path is what we would call in the biz a waste of time. This means absolutely nothing. You still have to take the shortcut. If you do not take the shortcut, if you do not find the shortcut, you still have to take the bottom challenging path. which makes this top an extreme waste of time. Now, that might be different if these interesting nodes were maybe more interesting. I was being, I would say, pretty generous with the interestingness here, as they do reference parts of the plot, and they do provide interesting and intriguing interactions, but all in all, they do not progress anything that happens afterward, and they don't really comment that much on anything that came before. This 46 especially, I was being very generous on. And this 49 is a totally unrelated subplot about a succubus that moved in after everyone was already dead. It's certainly interesting. It's an interesting little side plot, but it has nothing to do with, frankly, anything. And so when you combine it with this terrible fan structure that just appears built to waste time, this entire top area is just a massive time waster. Right? If you delete this, it actually becomes a lot more clear what's going on here. Right? It becomes a lot more clear, like, what's happening. So if you see this sort of structure, it needs to provide something unique. I mean, honestly, in general, I wouldn't even do it. What I would do is make this top path what I would call a long path. So a long path is typically a path with several obstacles around it that, while they take much longer, they are much more straightforward. So really what I would do here, if I had to modify this, it's actually very simple. Number one, I would fix the fan structure, but that's neither here nor there. What I would do first is I would turn this 46 into another red, or maybe I would move the succubus out of 49 and put her into 46, and then make this 49 a red. We're trying to make this a little bit more challenging. However, in 46, we are going to deliver a very obvious clue that this is the way down to the dragon. By the way, there's a dragon down here. That's number 52. Doesn't really matter. But at 46, we're going to deliver like a, hey, dragon this way sign. And we are going to present another obstacle. So this path is going to have double the amount of obstacles of the other path, but it's going to be very straightforward. You're not going to have to do an extreme amount of thinking. Your players will not have to discover things. They will not have to pass perception checks. They will just have to expend resources, and they will get there. And then the last thing we do is we offer a path from 49A to 50, an easy path, or maybe a red path. I mean, it just has to be a path that is obvious. And this structure you could call just your default dungeon structure. Just do this over and over and over, and you will have at least a solid basis for a dungeon. You have entrance, you have a long but very obvious path that just requires spending some resources. You have a shortcut path that, while less resource intensive, maybe requires more specific resources to be utilized. And then you have a risky, challenging path that maybe requires the same number of resources. It also requires less than the middle one, but there is distinct risk if your resources fail you or if you get bad rolls. This could be the most generic setup that you could ever create. And it's very easy. This is so close to doing it. It just fails right here, and this isn't quite hard enough. So, that is the last thing that I will note with this on the topic of shortcuts. That is the general way you should think about shortcuts. Shortcuts should require very specific resources. Challenging paths should require a lot of risk in your resource use. And what we would call obstacle paths or long paths should just require more resources. Those are kind of the three types of routes that you can abstract almost anything into if you really want to boil it down really, really far. So, that is Forge of Fury. Okay. Next, we will go to Gnomengarde. Gnomengarde is, I would say, probably the worst map on the list. It's tied with Emberhold. But I think that Emberhold maybe has a little bit of an edge up on it, just because Emberhold is more interesting than Gnomengarde is, at least to me. But the big thing that I want to talk about on Gnomengarde are junctions and what I'm going to call abstracting abstractions. So, let's look at the layout without any sort of junctions. This area is horrible. You have all of these crisscrossing lines. There's so many obstacles. It just doesn't make sense, right? You look at it and you're like, okay, well, I see the map underneath. That's not actually what's going on, right? There's a kind of a central area, central little bit right here that all of them connect to, and then they connect off to each other. So you might look at it and say, okay, Megaphone Man, you're being a little bit harsh here, don't you think? Oh, just wait until you see Emberhold. But this is a great time for us to use a junction. We put a junction in the middle here, and suddenly, we all have a nice sigh of relief because this looks so much better all of a sudden. And it actually makes sense with what is going on. And these junctions are just areas where basically the map looks bad if you don't have them. However, this is not a limitation of the notation, as you might initially think. You might initially think, oh man, the notation just can't handle it if you don't make something up. No. I would actually claim that this shows you even more about the map. If you have to put a junction in here for the map to make sense, this needs to be a more explicit area. You need to have a little room here with maybe some signs pointing in different directions, or a small table with two gnomes playing cards at it. A guard just standing there lazily in kind of a small alcove. There needs to be something to describe this as a junction. Otherwise, it will feel cluttered and confusing. If this doesn't feel like a central area, if you don't describe that within the narration of this dungeon, it will feel cluttered and confusing, just like it looks up here. So if you have to use the term abstract the abstraction, you need to build that in to your descriptive language at the very least, maybe even into the map itself. Maybe this is just a wake-up call that you need a little bit of a room right here. Even just taking out these three little squares could make this exactly what I'm talking about. Now, let's keep that in mind, and let's look. This is it with the junction off layout. This is the fastest path. Now, I think that we can all pretty quickly understand that this is terrible. You do not want your players to be able to speed run the dungeon. You do not want to have this whole area be completely superfluous. And let me assure you, it is superfluous. Like, I looked at this, right? Because I didn't, do too much deep diving into what each area did. I didn't try to understand the dungeon a bunch. I just looked at each area just enough to determine what kind of node it would be. If it would be interesting, red, treasure, I looked at it just enough. So I saw this and I was like, wow, this is terrible. Maybe this obstacle needs something down here. Probably, all of them are so fast to get to, but hopefully in like G9L, we put the key to this door or something. No, there is no key to this door. You either have to batter down the door or convince the people inside to let you in. There is absolutely no reason to go down here other than to learn more about what's going on in G15, but none of that knowledge actually helps you overcome or interact with G15. Now, there is the sort of ultimate goal of the quest of kind of curing the king of his madness. And the king's madness is related to the mimic, which is in G7. Okay. At most generous, we are then saying that you have to go and kill the mimic before you can complete G15. I still don't think that's true, but I will be as generous as possible to this map. That adds one pit stop before you are just right back on the road to G15. You just have to go and kill this. It's that simple. And then you can get to G15 and you're all good. This shortcut here is definitely a shortcut. I put an X on it because there's actually no way to discover it within the actual language of the book. The module says that it's there. It makes it very obvious and explicit, but it says that only the people inside of G15 will know about it and they won't tell you. So it might as well not exist. And then you have this, nice little G13 treasure here. But you can tell. I mean, this is a small dungeon. It is supposed to be bite-sized, but you should not be able to cut off half the dungeon and have it not matter at all. That's just bad. That is really, really bad design. This is one of the ones that is maybe the most obvious how bad it is just by looking at this. There's not even any obstacles. It is just interesting, nothing, and then red. And then interesting again. This isn't even really an obstacle room, unless you kind of make it one by being like really aggressive. But so this is just a really, really fast example of unnecessary areas. I don't even know how I would fix this, honestly. This is kind of a fundamentally poorly designed map. If I have to be completely honest with you, the only thing that I can maybe think of is we need to delete this entryway in here. Just full on delete it. Maybe delete this entryway over here and move those fan traps over there to kind of section things off a little bit better. And then make it to where there are kind of 3 distinct areas off of the central lotus. And you have to complete something in each area before you can go to the final area and actually complete the quest. Right? That's the only way I can think of to make this work. But you would have to distinctly separate each area so that your players don't go and just waste a shitload of time. Which is something, that they will do if you give them the chance. All right. And finally, what we've all been waiting for. It's the Emberhold. And I told you would think, Megaphone Man, Jack, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. Well, I said it during the video. I said, oh my god, all of these rooms are connected. They are completely independent of each other. That's a nightmare. That's a nightmare to run. What the fuck is that is right, Robin Banks. It's terrible. Now, obviously, I am being purposely inflammatory here, right? It is very clearly not this confusing to run through. So, let's do some work to abstract it. Let's add some junctions. Now, I had to add, in order to make this map palatable, I had to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 junctions in order to make this map somewhat palatable. That's bad. That's already bad. What is secondarily bad is the fastest path. And this gets into a little bit of complications where we didn't see the entire dungeon. So I'm not able to entirely know exactly what the dungeon looks like. I'm not able to entirely know what was planned and what the pacing would be like, but I can assume some things, and I know what we saw and what we actually went through. The first thing that I will draw your attention to is that this is pretty empty. Now, I had to add in all these junctions, and you might say, okay, the original nodes, this is actually an okay distribution of interesting obstacle and black nodes. I think it's a little light. Maybe have like a treasure or two over here, but it's honestly not bad. But when you consider that in order to make all of these paths make sense, you have to add in all of these junctions, the interesting ratio goes way down and the amount of boring goes way up. Now, if you're having to abstract and rethink so much that kind of this is where you get to, you maybe know that there's something wrong with the fundamental layout here. The first thing that I would recommend if I were redoing this is I would just eliminate this right corridor over here. This has a bunch of connections, this junction, and it actually would allow you to merge these junctions pretty easily. I would also merge some of these rooms together, not necessarily in terms of like actually having them be the same room, just have them share a wall so that the paths are much more understandable and you don't have to use as many junctions. A good rule of thumb is that you will probably need a junction anytime more than 3 paths intersect. Right, so this is 1, 2, 3, need a junction. 1, 2, 3, need a junction. 1, 2, 3, need a junction, etc., etc. And you can even see that back on the Gnomengarde. 1, 2, 3, need a junction. And you kind of have the same thing right here, but because the junctions are touching, you can abstract them into one. Now, you can also see, if we go into this, there are never 3 paths that actually touch each other. This is maybe the closest that it ever gets, is right here. But you can see that there's a very easy kind of roundabout access to it. You don't actually need the junction right here because you can draw these very long and squiggly lines, which I'll let you skip it. You can't do here. And it's mostly because all of these rooms are so disconnected. It is an interesting exercise to go through and try to make this map palatable. Maybe that's like the advanced class homework. But this really, really tells you that you need to rethink the fundamental layout. Now, the other thing that I'll show you is kind of similar to Gnomengarde, where it is a really fast shortest path. I mean, if we're being really honest, where the players come in is right back here. They could go directly up the stairs. They would be on the top floor. They could defeat the things over here, and then they would be in the throne room, and they could do the throne room fight. It's that easy. They could just do it. Now, they weren't there to do the throne room fight, so they needed to get Kima. Kima is down here. So let's kind of think through this. Their objective was to get Kima. Kima is right next to the outside. Really, really close. So this is a boring-ass dungeon. If they go directly from the outside to Kima, oh my god, terrible. And you know what? That's exactly what they did. All they did was go directly from the outside and straight to Kima. And you know what Matt did? He made Kima make them stay in the dungeon because it was terrible otherwise. Kima made them stay in the dungeon, and Kima did not, direct them towards the throne room. Kima nudged them towards all of this, which is a buttload of wasted time. Absolutely nothing about this progresses them towards their goal. absolutely nothing up here. The thing that progresses them towards their goal is going up these stairs, going to the throne room, which is right here, and killing the person so that Kima will let them leave. That is what actually progresses them towards their goal. So again, if we consider the fastest path, this dungeon is not great. There is so much wasted time. Now, I will be more kind. I will be more generous to Matt and the map at large. Let's assume that he assumed that they wouldn't go in through the back and that this was meant to be a Skyrim shortcut. Right? Let's assume that that exit was kind of meant to be like this, where they come in some other way and they just go out there during the final, like, you know, the whole castle's falling down around us. Oh my gosh, the outside exit's right there. Right? Maybe that's what that was meant to be. Number one, Matt still let them use it, so it's as much an entrance as an exit, but let's assume that. If we look at, okay, the absolute, we go in from the outside. This is the front door, from what we could see of it. Matt narrated the front door, we think, was like right here. So I'm assuming that they come in through that. They still have to find Kima, and then they have to go do the throne room fight because Kima's gonna make them. Nothing, small obstacle, nothing, Kima, more nothing, obstacle, throne room fight. That's boring as hell. There are 2 interesting nodes, 2 obstacle nodes, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 normal nodes. I mean, outside doesn't count, so 7 normal nodes. More than triple the amount of nothing nodes to nodes that have something that isn't nothing. Now, 3 of these are junctions. They are like, they are things that I invented, but I had to. I had to because if I don't, this is what we have. Right? And Matt didn't use junctions. Because, again, like I talked about in Gnomengarde, junctions need to be more clear. There were 2 guards standing here just in the middle of the hallway. Already kind of weird. I thought it at the time, but it was sort of odd. They should really easily, make a little alcove, like cut off the corners of these rooms, and make a nice little alcove where the 2 guards are just sitting there playing cards. It's that simple. And now this goes from being a random path, a hallway, to actually being a distinct area within this dungeon. An area that they could barricade, that they might stay and talk in, not a hallway to sneak down or to run through. It actually becomes a legitimate junction. So you have to kind of have it one of 2 ways. The way that Matt has it is this. He doesn't have any junctions. He doesn't describe anything as junctions. So this is just a confusing mess. It's a confusing mess when they run through it. I thought it was a confusing mess when I watched it. We talked about potential ways to make it more interesting, which I'll get to in a second. But all in all, just very, very confusing. And you either have to have it be confusing or utterly boring. Those are kind of the 2 options that we have. Stop reading my resume. Nothing, small obstacle, nothing. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to out you like that. So that's, those are kind of the 2 situations that we're in with this map. Now, during stream, we talked about something. We talked about making all of these hallways fit a more broad theme of the Emberhold, of being progressive lava traps, where people upstairs are pulling levers and lava is being released to flow down the hallways to, interrupt intruders if the alarm is sounded. Or maybe even if the alarm isn't sounded, that this is just a regularly scheduled thing to disrupt intruders. Number 1, that would create challenging paths in this place, which would be awesome. That would really spice this up. But there was a key part of that trap in that different levers would make lava flow down different hallways. Now, that's something we haven't really talked about with this map abstraction. How do you make it to where you can have maybe different patrols of guards that are in different areas at any given time? How do you make it to where you can have these changing, vibrant, moving dungeons and arenas that feel really alive and not super static? Well, if you have to have, you can either just have the static version. If you think that the map and the map abstraction makes sense and like you can understand what the traps and what the movements are without making anything fancy, then that's fine. I would say that that's kind of the case on Forge of Fury. In Forge of Fury, if you if you do something to the troglodytes, they will just go and find you elsewhere, and they'll interrupt you and cause issues elsewhere. That's interesting. And the dwarves do something similar where they kind of fall back, they pull people from other rooms, and I also thought that that was interesting. That's a cool thing to work into your map, but I still think that these maps make sense and are good at their very base case. And adding on those interesting and living layers doesn't change the core functionality and aspects of the map. Now, the Emberhold, if we did the lava traps that I ideated, or not I, we, the chat and I, ideated during the stream, that's a significant change to like the core characteristics of everything here. That's not just changing like, ooh, maybe like this obstacle like moves to another room, or this obstacle becomes a little bit weaker in this room. Like, this is like changing a boring path to like an obstacle or a challenging path. That's a huge difference. So if I were doing it on my end for my maps, I would just make multiple versions. So I would copy and paste these and have like different stages, right? Because in this example where there are multiple levers, there are a certain number of permutations of like the types of paths that the lava can take. Let's say there's 4. I would make 4 different maps. I would just copy and paste this guy 4 different times. And on each version, I would mark, okay, on this version, the path is going to be here. On this version, the path's going to be there, etc., etc. And that's number 1, great for making sure that your paths make sense, right? Individually from each other. But number 2, the thing I want to hit on here, if you have to do something to your map, kind of like the junctions, if you have to abstract your map, or you have to have multiple versions of your map on your end in order for your map to make sense to you, those multiple versions need to be clear to the party. The party at least needs to be clearly aware that there is multiple versions, even if they don't know what it means or they don't know how many. A really good example of this is Hunger Games Catching Fire, the clock arena. Right? The clock arena frequently changes. There are 12 unique versions of the clock arena that if you are making that arena, you have to be aware of. And it is very clear and obvious to every one of the combatants that there are 12 versions, right? It's not maybe clear at the very beginning, but it becomes very clear over the course of the story. Another much more normal example is that there's some sort of chime or bell that indicates a change in guard shift that will modify which nodes are obstacles and will modify which nodes are normal, right? They don't have to know what the chime means. They don't have to know what the bell means. But if you need multiple versions, there needs to be some sort of tell that there are multiple versions. You have to work that into the fabric of the map. And you should introduce it relatively early on to their journey. Again, they don't have to know what it means, but you should introduce this tell of the multiple versions relatively early on. That can even be a planned interesting node, where, to use the Forge of Fury example again, on the ledge, they actually do this. They reference dwarves. If you stand there and listen to the people talking over here, you can hear them referencing people going out, people shifting inside. they actually foreshadow these different types and these different configurations of dwarves within, or sorry, they're orcs, not dwarves. It's just the dwarf door. But they foreshadow all of this right at the beginning, right on the ledge. And it's honestly, I don't even think needed. I think it's really great that they do that, but the changes are not so significant as to really, really need it, I think. So I think it's great that they do that. I think that if you have any sort of change, you should foreshadow it really early on. And you can plan out a blue, quote unquote, interesting node for that. So for the Emberhold, I think it's very reasonable if we were going to do the lava trap where lava, flows through the hallways. If we were going to do that lava trap, the moment they get in, maybe here, or maybe even in the first junction, we make this a blue. And we have maybe the lights, maybe there are torches, there are flames on the wall that change colors. So you narrate hearing a loud grinding of stone as you see all of the torches beside you change colors. But you don't notice anything. And you have it planned out on your end that, there's the lava flowing. And it happens to be that the first two lava flows are something that they wouldn't be able to see from here. Or maybe you want to introduce it to them immediately. That's also something you can do. But this concept of having multiple versions of the map just means that you need those versions to have obvious tells. It's not really that complicated. It's just something you need to do. And that's it. Whoa. Congratulations. You have been educated. You all have your certificate in megaphone notation. I really want to show some more maybe more casual examples of me doing this. This was very structured. I had my bullet points that I wanted to get through, not very free form. So I want to do more iterations of this where I either go over very popular maps that you guys just want to see me analyze, or even have people submit maps for me to analyze for/with them. And we can discuss those things on stream. What could be modified, what could be kept, things like that. And as you see the notation in action, I hope that you will really start to see the benefit of it. I hope you already see the benefit of it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But this notation is what helped me, I think, really understand my maps better and start to be able to break them down better. Something that I've talked a lot about is that even if you have maybe naturalistic maps, right? You have maps that you just put things where they make sense, right? You just logically go down the path of, okay, if this thing is here, then this thing should be here, and you just progress down that logic path. This map notation not only is still valuable, but I would say it's even more valuable. It shows you where you could maybe insert some treasure nodes. It shows you where you could insert some interesting nodes. And an interesting node doesn't have to be something that's built into the fabric of the layout. It can be foreshadowing. It can be the rumbling of a boulette off in the distance that will be a problem later in the dungeon. It can be a lot of things. And so even if you are building your maps what you consider to be, naturalistically, this can still show you where to insert things to make the pacing feel a little bit better and to make sure that your party doesn't tune out halfway through. So that's it. Thank you all for stopping in. Very, different stream than normal. Not a lot of chat interaction. Like I said, kind of in the middle, a little bit more not scripted, but bulleted out. This is how I'm going to probably do a lot of my longs from now on, like the things that will eventually be edited down into, normal tight videos. So let me know what you think of it down in the comments. Let me know if you, would rather me just not stream it beforehand and just see the nicely edited package afterward. I liked it a lot. I think it helped me, I don't know, keep my energy up. There's something about the live format that I think gives me a lot more energy, even when going through a relatively scripted video like this. But let me know if you hated it. And I retain my right to ignore your hatred. But that'll be it. That was me, and this is you, and this is goodbye. I'll see you tomorrow for Critical Role, second part of episode 22. Goodbye. See you then.